Hello, I'm Jenny Fern. Welcome to my library. I am a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. So let's talk about books. Today we have my July reading wrap-up. It is the 2nd of August today, and July was a great reading month. June, I read an absolute ton, and I kept that rolling into July, where I did want to incorporate a little bit more of the books that I own. And I did that successfully. Let's start with the books that I own. Let's just do it in that order. The first of the books that I own that I finished reading was Super Sad True Love Story by Gary Shteyngart, which has been chewed by my cat. I picked this up at a thrift store because the cover was something that I was really keyed in on. I'd seen this cover before in a listicle, probably from BuzzFeed Books back when that used to exist, and I think it was comparing this book to 1984. So it was basically like, if you like this classic, then I think you'll like this book. Super Sad True Love Story plops you into this future world, and there's a lot going on that I don't feel like I can actually explain. There is this world building that takes place where it's not like, at least for me, I didn't feel like I left like super well versed in the politics of this world. Just like how in my current existence, I wouldn't be super well versed in the politics that we have going on. So it was very like immersive. You're immersed in this future world where it's kind of similar to what we have going on nowadays, but there are some key things that are different and that are quite dystopian. But again, it's more of just an immersive, like you understand kind of what's going on as you're reading it, but you don't get like these info dumps of like the full scope and really grasping exactly what's going on. You know what? Let me read the back of the book because this will help me stop floundering. In the near future, America is crushed by a financial crisis, and our patient Chinese creditors may just be ready to foreclose on the whole mess. Then Lenny Abramov, son of a Russian immigrant janitor and an ardent fan of printed-bound media artifacts, aka books, meets Eunice Park, an impossibly cute Korean-American woman with a major in images and a minor in assertiveness. Could falling in love redeem a planet falling apart? We have these two characters. They come from very different backgrounds. They first meet in Italy, strangely enough, and they are living in this very tumultuous time, and it just gets worse and worse as the story progresses. It is a bit of a love story. It's like in a very weirdly realistic and also uncomfortable love story. It's not cute. I would not describe this book as cute at all. How did I feel about it? Super mixed feelings. It was very an experience. It was unique. It had a very unique voice, but it wasn't like my full cup of tea. Whatever this is, there was a lot of this. It had a lot of essence. So I don't fault it at all for lacking in any way, but it just wasn't exactly me. I don't know who I'd recommend this to. That's the other thing. And so there's just like a lot going on, very complex. Everybody's like kind of complex, and the whole environment is kind of complex, and nobody is perfect in any way. They're all deeply flawed. So it was an interesting read. I also read The Wave by Susan Casey. I recall one of you commenting on one of my videos that you had read The Wave, and that Susan Casey very clearly had a crush on one of these surfers who I forget his name. Laird Hamilton. And it's for real. For real, she is so obsessed with him in this book. There's a picture of her and him on a jet ski together in the book, which is just so funny. It's so funny that this is included. This was an interesting book. I love reading about the oceans. I love learning about the oceans. I love deep, deep ocean exploration, deep ocean life is so fascinating to me. But this book is about waves. My favorite parts of this book were when we got into science and there were interviews with scientists who were researching like rogue waves and these like sudden, unexpected, massive waves. Also information about like undersea landslides and how those can cause these giant waves. Really interesting scientific work around like waves. Like the study of waves is very complicated. When I was in grad school, I took a class that was on like vibrations and acoustics, which all has to do with, you know, waves and like resonance and stuff like that. So I do, to some very, very small degree, understand how deeply complicated all of that can be. But so much of this book was her following around these big wave surfers, these tow surfers, which is so funny. I was listening to this on audiobook for most of it. I did read some of the physical copy as well. And it was when I started reading the physical copy that I was like, oh, tow, like they're getting towed in on a jet ski. Because I just kept hearing tow surfers and I just kept thinking of like toes. That's a me problem. I don't really care about like the surfing stuff, but I do also understand that those are the humans on this planet who do have like the most visceral understanding of waves, and also they do end up learning so much about how waves work and how to anticipate them because of the stuff that they do. So an interesting cross of like kind of scientific nonfiction and then also just like people pieces. We follow Laird a lot. I will say I did have a fun time reading. There was a chapter about like she went to an awards show, like a Billabong ceremony for like big surfing stuff, and that was actually very fun to read as well. That's this book. The book that I read from my shelf here that I had the absolute best time with. Loved this book to pieces. So happy that I read this. That is Travels with Charley by John Steinbeck. I love John Steinbeck. I've read 3 John Steinbecks this year. I read The Pearl, Of Mice and Men, and now this. Of Mice and Men and The Pearl were both rereads, and it's been quite a while since I've read like a fresh new Steinbeck, so I'm really happy to have read this. I never thought of Steinbeck as existing in this era, which is so funny. So, this was written in 1962, and I always think of John Steinbeck as existing in the 1930s, because so much of the work that he wrote was about like the Great Depression and that kind of early era of life. A lot of the stuff that he wrote was earlier as well in his life, but he experienced the 1960s, and so he saw this much more modern America than what he wrote about. So I think of Mice and Men, like knowing what Salinas is like now, knowing what Monterey is like now, because I am from California and I live in California, and I can see what those places have become. Like, I've been to Cannery Row, you know, and he actually talks about how he went to visit Monterey again and was like so baffled in like a good way Cannery Row became this tourist destination instead of this like horrific, stinky, like hard labor canning destination. So it was so lovely to hear his real inputs on how America was progressing or like continuing. I hate the loaded connotation of the word progress, you know? So how things have gone, how they have come to be. I loved hearing his perspectives, and I love how nuanced he is with like, he talks a little bit about like, now milk is pasteurized and like, you can buy meals in like ready-made meals and you don't have to suffer your mom's cooking. You don't have to die of some bacterial infection from your milk. But like, did we lose something? Like, he's very much like, I did like things how they used to be, but I totally understand that the world is like safer and more convenient now. Even while I protest the assembly line production of our food, our songs, our language, and eventually our souls, I know that it was a rare home that baked good bread in the old days. Mother's cooking was, with rare exceptions, poor. That good unpasteurized milk, touched only by flies and bits of manure, crawled with bacteria. The healthy, old-time life was riddled with aches, sudden death from unknown causes, and that sweet local speech I mourn was the child of illiteracy and ignorance. It is the nature of a man, as he grows older, a small bridge in time, to protest against change, particularly change for the better. But it is true that we have exchanged corpulence for starvation, and either one will kill us. The lines of change are down. We, or at least I, can have no conception of human life and human thought in 100 years or 50 years. Perhaps my greatest wisdom is the knowledge that I do not know. The sad ones are those who waste their energy in trying to hold it back, for they can only feel bitterness and loss and no joy in gain. Loved hearing about it. Loved hearing about how he was saddened as he traveled across America to not hear regional dialects as much anymore because of radio and stuff like this. So, yes, John Steinbeck travels in a truck loaded to the brim with all of his belongings. He travels across the United States along the top. He stays a little bit in California, then he goes all the way back. I actually did not realize that he was a New Yorker after he left California. I always think of him as a Californian, having grown up here and read his works in the public education system of California. I read a lot of Steinbeck work. So here's his travels. He spends time here, he goes down the coast, he's in California, crosses the desert, and then he, oh my god, yes, he talks about the, like, desegregation. That was amazing. Loved, never thought in a million years that I would hear his thoughts on that, because I just don't think of him in that time period. I just didn't realize that he would have had opinions on desegregation. And then about here, he just is like desperate to get home and doesn't even remember anything, just drives back home. So, loved it. Loved it so much. Highly recommend. Really one of my favorite things that I've read this year so far. It was so fun. There's also like a beautiful, beautiful ode to the redwoods and to sequoias. And I live in a place where I see redwoods literally every day. They're all over the place. Across my street, there's a great sequoia. I am deeply disappointed when I go to literally any other place. Their forests are so shit compared to the forests along the coastline here. They're so much more grand than anything I've ever seen anywhere else. That's my super biased opinion. Hi, I'm privileged. Let's move on to the other books. Let's go to manga, why don't we? I read Aria Volume 2 I did finish that in the month of July. I thought I might finish it in the month of June. I did not. Aria Volume 2. I really like Aria. The only thing that I have to say that is a little weird is that the seasons go by really quickly in this series. And I think the year is supposed to be about twice as long as it is on Earth. And I'm like, she is really growing up. She's gonna be so old by the time I get to like volume 10. I don't know why it's going so quickly, but I do love seeing like the different traditions that they have that are inspired by both Japanese and Italian culture. So there's this like Venice culture just really imbued in this world, and I do love reading about that. It's also just such a comforting and like friendly and sweet manga. I do really enjoy it. I also read volume 3. I read Frieren volume 13. I don't really remember this super well, if I'm being completely honest. I think we're like setting up for something that's quite exciting, but I really do love to like binge manga. And so it has been very hard for me, like, waiting quite a long time for Frieren. I am feeling so comforted and pleased and, like, just really, really comforted by the Apothecary Diaries manga by Nekokurage. I'm trying to find the other manga in English and buy it, because I would love to also read that, and it's not offered by my library. I cannot find it in English. I could find it in Korean, and I would love love it in English. Don't want to have to learn a second language in order to read a manga, but I might. I could. It's possible. So yes, I read volume 1 of the Apothecary Diaries. Oh my god. It was so beautiful, so sweet. I love that story so much. And also volume 4. Love volume 4. Very sweet as well. And the like bonus material in the back was also very cute. I'm reading them in whatever order they are available from my library. I do have holds for volume 2. Now for all of the other books. I read a few from my library. All of the manga also was from my library, and then I also read something from NetGalley that I'd like to talk about. I read The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. This was a recommendation from one of my coworkers about a year ago. And I'm like so into growing fruit trees from seed and seeing the like inherent diversity of life in like the resultant fruits. And the first chapter of The Botany of Desire is about apples and the story of Johnny Appleseed. I adored learning about that. I didn't really understand any of that history before, and I feel much more knowledgeable and able to discuss who Johnny Appleseed was and the kind of context of that story and that person, and the way that story kind of morphed into something else. So I really, really recommend reading The Botany of Desire. It covers 4 plants. The apple, tulips, so we get to experience the tulip craze that occurred in the Netherlands, which was very, very interesting. Loved hearing about the reason for these like beloved tulips. The like biological reason was so interesting. I'm like not giving spoilers for this nonfiction work because I actually find like the true story so interesting that I do want you to read the book. Then cannabis. Also found cannabis extremely interesting. I have never grown, and I'm not super interested in growing that, to be honest. That was really, really cool to get this whole legality aspect into how people grow plants and how they keep certain strains alive and that kind of thing. loved reading about that. The last chapter was about the potato. This was where I kind of fell off. Love potatoes. I have a hard time growing them because I don't water enough, and we have a Mediterranean climate in California, so they just won't do that well without a lot of water. So we do cover a little bit of their origins in Peru, and then we cover a little bit about Ireland, and we also cover genetically modified varieties. We have some interfacing with Monsanto, and I just have to say, I think the potato was handled the least well. The history around the potato I don't think was handled extremely well, and all of the like genetics, the like bioengineering, that side of things also was very like, it's up to you to decide. Here's kind of my little bit of an opinion, a little bit, and I'm not going to say too much. And this was like, definitely had like some element of like, I didn't like that chapter. But I loved the apple chapter, and the tulip chapter, and the cannabis chapter. Completely flopped on the potato chapter, I think. Really, really loved that book. Would love to own that. I read The Apothecary Diaries Volume 7 by Natsu Hyuuga. Again, I love The Apothecary Diaries. Obviously I do. Volume 7, we have Mao Mao back in her element a little bit. The story was pretty weird. The story was a little weird, and all I can say is I'm just so excited to like continue to see how this story progresses. I just want to gobble it up all the time. I don't even have volume 8 on hold yet. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of like wallowing around reading the manga, I guess. I also read 6.5 short stories from Invitation by Nijin Kim. This was a collection of short stories that I got from NetGalley. It expired, and I was like, oh my god. I read 6 of these stories in the time that I needed to actually be sleeping in order to go to work the next day. But I was desperately trying to read this book and finish this book before I needed to review it for NetGalley. I didn't. I wrote a review though because I loved the stories. So I felt like super confident in giving a review that I loved the writing, loved the stories. I read over half of it in terms of page length. I read the first 5 stories, and then I read the last story. And then I read half of the story titled Invitation. Now, I just realized I can read this. I can finish reading this. I just downloaded it again. It was saying to me that it was expired. And I have no idea what has gone wrong or right, that I can now read it, and I'm going to finish reading it because I really, really enjoyed this book. So, the first story, Acapulco, we're following a tutor. There is a little boy who he's tutoring who says that his mother was murdered by his father. And the tutor is like, no, your mom just like left the family. And it has like this unsettling detachment where the tutor is like kind of interested in what's going on and like is hearing a lot of troubling things, but then is also like, this is not my problem. But then he's also like still kind of very loosely invested in the well-being of this boy. So I thought that was such a strong start. Then a family portrait, a dog runs off, and this man is like so useless, and his wife is just taking care of everything. That was very interesting to read from that perspective. Love letters. This was probably my favorite story of the bunch so far. It's about this girl or woman who goes to the wedding of this guy who had confessed that he was in love with her back when they were in like middle school. That was it's such a small little like moment in life that I just loved reading that perspective. We're in the heads of these like not that great people. It's really showcasing people who are very, very deeply human, deeply flawed, very unfiltered in their brains, thinking horrible things, but then you're also like very relatable things at the same time. I loved how it showcased how people can be. And then George, I also really loved this story. This is a guy who flies to visit his brother unannounced. He flies from South Korea to Bakersfield, where his brother has like bought a farm, and shows up to kind of like continue a conversation, which is very interesting. And then what's so funny, a man hears his wife like say something, swears she said something, and she's like, no, I didn't say anything. And yeah, I also read Invitation and the last story in this collection. Now I will try to read the remaining, I think, 5 stories. So I will read those in August, and I will tell you about them next month. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider sharing this with a friend, or consider liking and subscribing. And I will be back again soon.